I paid for my granddaughter's wedding, but when I arrived, they told me I wasn't invited. And that was the moment I realized I had never really been part of their family at all. I remember standing there in the lobby of the Grand Riverside Hotel, my hand still resting on the strap of my handbag, the kind my late husband always said made me look put together. Even on days I didn't feel it, the marble floors gleamed under the soft chandelier light. Guests in tailored suits and pastel dresses moved past me in a quiet, steady stream, their laughter blending with the distant sound of a string quartet playing somewhere deeper inside the ballroom. It was supposed to be a beautiful day, my granddaughter Olivia's wedding, a day I had helped build, piece by piece. Check by check I had paid for the venue, the catering, even the delicate floral arrangements that I'd personally chosen after spending 3 afternoons with the planner comparing roses and peonies like it mattered more than anything else. And yet, when the young man at the check-in table looked up at me and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't see your name on the list," something inside me went very still. I didn't argue, not right away. I simply smiled the way I had learned to do over the years, a small, polite smile that kept things from falling apart in public. "Could you check again?" I asked, my voice calm, almost detached. He nodded, scrolling through the tablet once more, his brow furrowing just enough to show he was trying. "Whitmore, you said?" I watched his finger move down the screen, slow, methodical, until it stopped. He hesitated, then turned the tablet slightly toward himself again. "I do see a Whitmore, but it's listed under external sponsor, no assigned seating." External sponsor. The words didn't sting at first, they just sat there, heavy and unfamiliar, like a phrase that didn't belong to me. I had spent 68 years being a mother, a wife, a grandmother. I had packed lunches, paid tuition, co-signed mortgages, and held my family together through more quiet storms than anyone ever acknowledged. And now, on the day my granddaughter was getting married, I wasn't a guest, I wasn't even family, I was a line item. I could feel people shifting behind me in line, the subtle pressure of impatience building. But I didn't move. I glanced past the check-in table, through the open doors of the ballroom, where I could see glimpses of white tablecloths and soft golden lighting, where everyone else was already inside, already seated, already part of something I had helped create without ever being invited into it. "That must be a mistake," I said finally, more to myself than to him. But even as I said it, I felt something settle deep in my chest, something quiet and cold, because mistakes don't usually come this neatly packaged. They don't come printed on digital lists and labeled so clearly. They come with hesitation, with confusion, with apologies. This had none of that. This felt intentional. I thanked the young man, stepped aside, and let the next guest take my place. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I moved away from the table. Each step measured, controlled. I didn't cry, I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood near the tall glass windows overlooking the river, watching as more guests arrived, their names called, their smiles welcomed, their presence expected. And for the first time that day, I allowed myself to think something I had been avoiding for years. Maybe I hadn't been forgotten. Maybe I had been erased. For a few seconds I remained by the window, watching the reflection of a celebration I was not part of, until I heard my name spoken behind me, not warmly, not with surprise, but with a careful tone that felt rehearsed. I turned slowly to find Vanessa standing a few steps away, her posture straight, her smile perfectly in place as if it had been practiced in a mirror. "Margaret," she said, her voice soft enough not to draw attention, but firm enough to carry intention. "I was not expecting you to come this early." Early, the word lingered in the air between us, quiet but sharp. I studied her face, the flawless makeup, the composed expression, the absence of any real confusion or apology. I was not aware there was a time I was allowed to arrive. I replied calmly. She gave a small laugh, the kind that does not reach the eyes, and glanced briefly toward the ballroom before stepping closer. "There must have been some miscommunication with the planner," she said, lowering her voice even more. "We had to make some adjustments to the guest list last minute. You understand how these things go." I did not answer right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, watching the way her fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her champagne glass, the only sign that she was not as at ease as she appeared. "No," I said finally, my tone even. "I do not understand how these things go." Because I was the one who paid for them. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face, something quick and sharp before it disappeared behind that same polished smile. "And we are very grateful for that," she replied smoothly. Truly, we could not have done this without your support. Support, the word sounded different now, hollow in a way it had never sounded before, but the ceremony has already started. She continued, tilting her head slightly as if offering something kind. And the seating is quite full, so it might be more comfortable if you waited out here until the reception portion begins. Wait out here like I was an afterthought, like I was a delivery that had arrived too soon. I nodded once, slowly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, because arguing would have changed nothing. Not in this moment, not in this place, of course, I said quietly. Vanessa seemed relieved by my response, her shoulders relaxing just enough to reveal it. We will make sure you are recognized during the speeches, she added, as if that were a gift, as if being mentioned from a distance could replace a seat at the table. Then she turned, already moving back toward the ballroom, her smile widening as she approached another group of guests, her voice lifting, her presence shifting seamlessly back into something bright and welcoming. I watched her go, the rhythm of her heels echoing softly against the polished floor, and I realized then that this had not been a mistake, not a last-minute adjustment, not a simple oversight. This had been decided, planned, arranged with care, just like everything else I had funded. I shifted my gaze toward the seating chart again, the glowing screen that had reduced me to a label that did not belong to me, and I stepped closer this time, reading the names slowly, deliberately. Table 1, family only. Table 2, close friends. Table 3, extended relatives. Each name placed with intention, each seat assigned with purpose, until I found mine again, not among them, but beneath them. External sponsor. No chair, no place, no belonging. I exhaled quietly, not in disappointment, but in recognition, because there is a moment when confusion ends and understanding begins, and it does not come loudly. It comes like this, in silence, in clarity, in the absence of doubt. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, not breaking, not collapsing, but settling into something steadier, something colder, because I was no longer standing outside wondering why I was not included. I was standing there knowing exactly why. I stepped back from the glowing seating chart and let my eyes adjust to the softer light of the hallway again, my reflection faint in the polished surface, as if even it was unsure whether I belonged there. And for a moment, I simply stood still, listening to the muffled music from inside, the rise and fall of voices, the occasional burst of laughter that felt distant, like something remembered rather than something real. And I realized how familiar that feeling was, not new, not sudden, but something that had been building quietly over the years in ways I had chosen not to examine too closely, because it was easier to believe in small explanations than to face a larger truth. I thought about the last Christmas dinner, the way Vanessa had insisted on hosting, how she had rearranged the table so that I ended up at the far end near the kitchen door, while she sat beside Michael at the center, how every time I tried to speak, someone else's voice seemed to rise just a little louder, just enough to cover mine. And I had told myself it was coincidence, that families grow, dynamics shift, nothing stays the same. I remembered Olivia's graduation 2 years ago, the ceremony where I had arrived early, holding a small gift wrapped in silver paper, only to find that my seat had been placed several rows behind the immediate family. And when I asked Michael about it, he had smiled distractedly and said, "It was just easier this way, Mom." And I had nodded, folding my hands in my lap, watching from a distance as my own family celebrated without me, telling myself again that it did not mean anything more than convenience, that I was still part of it even if I was not at the center. And then there were the smaller moments, the ones that seemed too insignificant to question on their own, phone calls that went unanswered until days later, invitations that arrived late or not at all, conversations that stopped when I entered the room and resumed when I left, each one easy to dismiss, easy to excuse, until they began to form a pattern that was no longer easy to ignore. Standing there now, outside a wedding I had funded but not been welcomed into, those memories no longer felt separate. They connected, fitting together with a quiet precision that made it impossible to look away, and I could see the shape of it clearly for the first time. Not neglect, not misunderstanding, but a gradual repositioning, a careful shifting of roles where I had been moved from mother and grandmother to something more distant, more convenient, something that could be acknowledged when needed and set aside when not. I rested my hand lightly against the cool glass beside me, feeling the steadiness of it beneath my fingertips, grounding myself not in emotion but in recognition. Because there is a difference between being overlooked and being replaced. And what I was seeing now was not absence, but substitution. Vanessa had not simply taken control of the event. She had redefined who belonged at its center and who did not. And Michael had allowed it. Perhaps not all at once, perhaps not with intention at the beginning, but through a series of small choices that had led us here, to this moment where I stood outside looking in, no longer questioning whether I should be there, but understanding that I had been placed exactly where they wanted me to be, and the clarity of that realization did not hurt the way I might have expected. It did not break me or leave me searching for words. Instead, it settled into something quiet and firm, something that did not ask for permission or approval, something that simply acknowledged what was true and began, slowly, to consider what would come next. I remained by the window a little longer, not because I did not know what to do, but because I wanted to be certain of what I was feeling before I moved. Because there is a difference between reacting and deciding. And I had spent too many years reacting quietly to things I should have examined more closely, and I was not going to do that again. Not today, not here. Not after everything had finally arranged itself into something I could no longer misunderstand. I let my gaze drift back toward the ballroom, watching the movement of people through the open doors, the way servers carried trays with careful precision, the way guests leaned in close to one another, their conversations soft and easy, untouched by the kind of awareness that now stood firmly in my chest. And then I saw him. Michael stepped closer to the entrance again, greeting an older couple. With a warmth that felt practiced, his hand resting lightly on the man's shoulder as he spoke, his smile wide, effortless, familiar in a way that made something in me tighten, not with longing, but with recognition, because I knew that version of him. I had helped shape it. I had taught him how to greet people, how to make others feel welcome, how to stand tall and look someone in the eye. And now he was using all of that to host a celebration that did not include me. I took a slow breath and stepped away from the glass, my heels steady against the marble as I moved toward the seating display once more, not to search for my name again, but to confirm something I already understood. And as I stood there reading the same arrangement of names, I became aware of a quiet voice beside me. Margaret. I turned to see a man I recognized, though it took me a moment to place him because time had softened the edges of memory, but not erased them entirely. Thomas Reynolds, he said gently, offering a small nod. I worked with your husband years ago, on the estate matters. The recognition settled in slowly, and I inclined my head in return. Of course, I said, my voice even. It has been some time. His eyes moved briefly toward the seating chart, then back to me, and there was something in his expression that felt measured, observant, as if he had already noticed more than had been spoken. I was not sure you had arrived yet, he said, and there was a pause, just long enough to carry meaning without forcing it. I arrived, I replied simply, and I allowed the words to rest between us without explanation, because I no longer felt the need to explain what was visible. Thomas studied me for a moment longer, then nodded slightly, as if something had been confirmed. Your husband was very particular, he said after a moment, his tone thoughtful, especially when it came to protecting what mattered to him. I held his gaze, feeling the weight of that statement settle into place, not as a question, but as a reminder, something deliberate, something chosen. He believed in clarity. I said quietly yes. Thomas replied, and there was a faint shift in his posture, something almost imperceptible but intentional, and in conditions, when necessary, the word lingered, subtle but precise, and I felt something align within me, not sudden, not dramatic, but firm, like a piece of understanding that had been waiting for the right moment to settle into place. I did not ask him to explain further, and he did not offer more, because whatever needed to be understood was already there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. Thomas gave a small nod, then stepped away, disappearing back into the movement of the lobby, leaving me standing once again in the quiet space between inclusion and exclusion. But this time the space felt different, not uncertain, not undefined, but deliberate, as if it had been placed there for a reason. I adjusted the strap of my handbag once more, my fingers steady, my posture straight, and I turned my attention toward the ballroom doors, not with hesitation, not with doubt, but with a clarity that had not been there before, because I was no longer standing outside wondering whether I belonged inside. I was standing there knowing exactly what had been done, and more importantly, understanding what had been set in motion long before I ever Arrived, I did not rush toward the ballroom doors, even though I could have, even though no one was physically stopping me, because I understood now that this moment was not about access. It was about position, and I had spent too many years accepting the position others quietly assigned to me without question, without resistance, without fully recognizing what it meant until now I remained where I was, just outside the threshold, watching as the doors opened and closed with each passing guest. The music inside shifting from soft strings to something brighter as the ceremony ended and the reception began, applause rising briefly before settling into the hum of celebration. And with each passing second, the space between me and that room felt less like exclusion and more like a line that had been drawn with intention. I adjusted the bracelet on my wrist, the one my husband had given me on our 40th anniversary. Its weight familiar, grounding, and I remembered the way he used to speak. About planning, about making sure that things were arranged not just for the present, but for what might come later. The way he would sit at the dining table with papers spread out in careful order, explaining details I had once only half listened to because I trusted him completely, because I believed that his carefulness was something distant, something that would never need to be tested. Then Thomas's words returned to me, not loudly but with quiet precision. He believed in conditions, when necessary. And I realized that what I had once thought of as excessive caution might have been something else entirely, something intentional, something designed for a moment like this. I reached into my handbag slowly, not searching in uncertainty, but moving with purpose, my fingers finding the small leather folder I had carried with me out of habit more than expectation, a habit formed over years of managing small details, of keeping important things close without fully considering when they might be needed. I opened it just enough to confirm what I already knew was there, the folded document resting neatly inside, its edges crisp, its presence steady, and I felt no surge of emotion as I looked at it, no sudden wave of anger or triumph, only a quiet sense of alignment, as if something long prepared was now simply waiting to be acknowledged. I closed the folder again and returned it to my bag, my movements calm, deliberate, and when I lifted my gaze once more, I saw that the doors to the ballroom were now fully open, guests moving more freely in and out, laughter spilling into the hallway. The energy shifting from ceremony to celebration. I could see Vanessa near the center of the room, surrounded by a small circle of guests, her posture confident, her smile bright, her presence firmly established as the one orchestrating everything around her. And for a moment, I simply observed her, not with resentment, but with clarity, recognizing the precision of what she had done, the way she had shaped the narrative, positioned herself, and redefined the roles within this family without ever needing to say it directly. I exhaled slowly, feeling the steadiness settle deeper within me, not as a reaction but as a decision. Because there comes a point when understanding is no longer enough, when clarity requires action, not loud or impulsive, but measured, intentional, and visible. I stepped forward then, not quickly, not hesitantly, but with the kind of certainty that does not ask for permission, my heels echoing softly against the marble as I moved toward the open doors, crossing the threshold that had been left unguarded not because I was welcome, but because they believed I would choose not to enter. And as I walked into the room they had carefully arranged without me, I realized that their first mistake had not been leaving my name off the list. It had been assuming that I would remain where they placed me. I did not stop once I crossed into the ballroom. Even as I felt the subtle shift in the air, the way conversations dipped just slightly as unfamiliar recognition passed from one guest to another, not because they did not know who I was, but because they did, and they were not expecting to see me here. Not like this, not moving with purpose. Instead of hesitation, the room itself was exactly as I had imagined it during those long afternoons of planning. The round tables dressed in ivory linen, the centerpieces arranged with careful symmetry, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off polished glass, every detail in place, every element executed with precision. And for a moment I allowed myself to take it in, not with pride, but with a quiet acknowledgement that this was something I had helped create. Even if I had not been meant to stand within it, a server passed by with a tray of champagne flutes, offering one with a polite nod, and I accepted it. Without a word, my fingers steady around the delicate stem as I continued walking, not toward the edges of the room where I might have once chosen to remain unnoticed, but toward the center, toward the place where Vanessa stood surrounded by her carefully curated circle, her laughter bright, her posture relaxed, her presence commanding in a way that suggested complete control. As I approached, I saw the moment she noticed me, the brief interruption in her expression, the fraction of a second, where her smile faltered before it returned, wider this time, more deliberate, more aware. "Margaret," she said, her voice lifting just enough to carry over the soft hum of conversation, drawing the attention of those around her without making it seem intentional. "I did not realize you had come in." I met her gaze calmly, holding it without challenge but without softness either. "I was told it would be more comfortable to wait outside," I replied evenly, but I decided I preferred to see what I had paid for. A few of the guests shifted slightly, their eyes moving between us, the tone of the moment changing in ways that could not be easily dismissed. Vanessa gave a light laugh, the sound carefully measured, as if she were adjusting the narrative in real time. "Oh, you know how hectic these events can be," she said smoothly. "Things get a little disorganized, but we are so glad you are here now." Glad, the word landed gently, but it did not carry weight. "Not anymore, of course," I said, my voice quiet but clear. It would have been difficult to miss it entirely. There was a pause then, brief but noticeable, and in that pause I saw something else beneath her composure. Not panic, not yet, but awareness. The kind that comes when control begins to shift in ways that cannot be easily corrected around us. The room continued to move, music playing softly, glasses clinking, conversations resuming with a careful distance, as if everyone present sensed that something had changed but could not yet define it. I lifted the champagne flute slightly, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement of the moment, of the setting, of the roles we were all playing whether we admitted it or not. "It is a beautiful event," I said, letting my gaze move briefly across the room before returning to hers. "Everything has been arranged very precisely." Vanessa inclined her head, accepting the compliment with a small, controlled smile, but her eyes remained fixed on mine, searching, measuring, waiting. "We wanted everything to be perfect," she replied, and for the first time since I had entered the ballroom, I allowed the faintest hint of a smile to touch my lips. Not warm, not cold, but certain, because perfection, I had learned, often depends on what is hidden just beneath the surface, and I was no longer interested in what had been arranged for appearance alone. I was interested in what had been arranged in truth. The moment did not need to be announced loudly for it to shift. It happened quietly in the way conversations thinned just enough around us, in the way a few nearby guests leaned slightly closer without appearing obvious, sensing that something beneath the surface was about to rise. And I let that moment settle before I moved, not rushing it, not forcing it, because timing, I had learned, is not about speed but about clarity. I lowered my glass gently onto the nearest table, the soft sound of it touching the linen almost disappearing beneath the music, and I reached into my handbag with steady hands, not hurried, not uncertain, simply deliberate. Vanessa's eyes followed the movement, her expression still composed but no longer entirely relaxed, and beside her, Michael had turned slightly toward us, his posture tightening just enough to reveal that he was beginning to understand that whatever this was, it was no longer something that could be smoothed over with polite conversation. I drew out the leather folder slowly, holding it in one hand, not raised, not hidden, simply present, and I looked at them both, allowing a brief silence to form, the kind that gathers attention without asking for it. "Your father believed in planning for clarity," I said, my voice even, carrying just far enough to reach those nearest without needing to be elevated. And I saw the flicker of recognition in Michael's eyes at the mention of his father, something instinctive, something rooted deeper than the moment itself. He believed that when something important was given, it should be understood completely, not just appreciated in the moment, but respected over time. Vanessa's smile remained in place, but it had changed now, less certain, more guarded, and she inclined her head slightly, as if acknowledging the statement without fully engaging with it. "Of course," she replied, her tone careful. "We all appreciate everything that has been done." I nodded once, not disagreeing, not agreeing, simply continuing. "This event," I said, letting my gaze move briefly across the room again, "was made possible under a very specific understanding, one that was not informal, not assumed, but written, defined, and protected, there was a stillness then, subtle but unmistakable, as the words settled into the space around us. Not dramatic, not loud, but precise. Michael shifted his weight slightly. His expression no longer neutral, his attention fixed now in a way that suggested he was no longer trying to avoid the moment, but was fully within it. Mom, he began quietly, but I did not stop him. I did not interrupt. I simply held his gaze long enough for him to understand that this was not a conversation that would move in the direction he preferred. Any financial support connected to this event, I continued, my tone unchanged, was part of a structured arrangement within your father's estate, one that includes clear provisions regarding respect, acknowledgement, and public conduct. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly around her glass, the smallest indication of tension breaking through her control, and I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the rapid adjustment of expectations, the realization that this was not a misunderstanding to be dismissed but a detail to be accounted for. I am sure there has been no intention to disregard those provisions, I added, the faintest pause before the final word. But intention is not the measure that applies here. No one spoke immediately, and in that silence the shift became undeniable, not explosive, not chaotic, but firm, like a foundation revealing itself beneath a carefully arranged surface. And for the first time since I had entered the room, I saw uncertainty where there had been certainty before, not just in Vanessa, not just in Michael, but in the space around them, in the way others now watched with a different kind of attention, one that understood that something had changed in a way that could not be undone by a simple explanation. I closed the folder gently, not as a conclusion, but as a signal, and I held it at my side once more, my posture unchanged, my expression calm, because this was not about raising my voice or taking control in the way they had. It was about revealing what had always been there, waiting, defined long before this day ever arrived. No one rushed to speak after that, not immediately, because the kind of truth that does not rely on volume tends to settle differently. It moves through a room quietly, changing the way people stand, the way they look at one another, the way they begin to understand that something beneath the surface has shifted in a way that cannot be easily dismissed. I could see it in Michael first, the way his expression tightened, not in anger but in recognition, the kind that comes when something long avoided finally presents itself without room for interpretation. Mom, he said again, more carefully this time, his voice lower, controlled, as if trying to regain balance within a moment that was no longer his to manage. We did not mean for anything to be taken the wrong way. I held his gaze for a second longer, not challenging him, not softening either, simply allowing the weight of what had already been said to remain where it was. Meaning is not determined after the fact, I replied quietly. It is shown in what is done. Vanessa shifted beside him, her posture still composed but no longer effortless, the ease she had carried earlier replaced by something more deliberate, more cautious. We can fix this, she said quickly, her tone adjusting, searching for resolution. There must have been a misunderstanding with the planner. We can have a seat arranged right away. Of course you should be at the family table. A seat arranged now. The offer hung in the air, carefully placed, as if it could restore what had been removed. I glanced briefly toward the tables, the perfectly set places, the names printed neatly on cards, each one chosen in advance, each one intentional, and I understood that what was being offered was not inclusion, but correction, not acknowledgement, but repair of appearance. No, I said simply, and the word did not carry force. It did not need to. It was steady enough on its own. That will not be necessary. There was a pause then, longer this time, and in that pause something settled fully into place, not just for me, but for them as well, because refusal is often clearer than argument, and it leaves less room for adjustment. Michael exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly, as if something within him had shifted from defense to understanding, or at least to the beginning of it. And for a brief moment, I saw something familiar in his eyes, something that belonged to a time before all of this, before the careful rearranging of roles, before distance had become the easier choice then. Presence, what do you want us to do? He asked quietly, and the question, simple as it was, carried more honesty than anything he had said all day. I considered it for a moment, not because I did not know the answer, but because I wanted to be certain it was understood correctly when I spoke. Nothing, I said at last, my voice calm. measured. This is not about what you do next. It is about what has already been shown. Vanessa's